Hey, welcome back with The Crocodile by Vincent, the first novel to be published by a person from Papua New Guinea. This was originally published in Australia in English, I believe. I have no reason to believe that it was translated, as there is no translator mentioned. So originally in English, and I am counting it for Melanesia and Papua New Guinea, as a whole, under that umbrella, because for this Reading Around the World project, I don't want to have to find a book for every island nation that's out there, so I'm kind of doing it in some bigger categories, at least for the Pacific Ocean. So regardless, The Crocodile by Vincent, it's not, and from the reviews I looked up, pretty much everybody notices this, that the writing is a bit clunky. But I want to go a little deeper than that. Why do people feel the writing isn't that great? And, and despite this, I do think there's some interesting things about it, but I want to address this first. Part of it may be from an English standpoint, it isn't the most well-written book, but I think also what contributes to that is that the author really is coming from the native perspective, genuinely. And it's a post-colonial novel, so we're getting the perspective of the colonized people in Papua New Guinea, and with all its nuances and complexities, which if you followed the channel, I appreciate. And it doesn't cater to the English reader in many ways. It throws out a lot of native, indigenous vocabulary without footnotes, without direct explanation of what it's talking about. But, we live in an era of Google, so really none of this should be a hurdle. But there are certain ways that the characters have of expressing themselves that I feel are it sort of is like reading a translation. Even if it wasn't written in English, I still feel that the author is sort of writing and thinking his characters out in the syntax of the native language of Papua New Guinea. So that is something to, I think, keep in mind when people criticize the writing of this book, if you do look up those other reviews. I also do appreciate about the book that it is succinct, just under 200 pages, and I think that's something that more authors really need to take into account if it's a first novel, or they feel that maybe they still need to get better in many ways at writing. Don't publish 300, 400 page novels. It was true in 1970. It's true today. It seems like most books out there could be trimmed down more than they are. I'm starting to get that feeling. And it's kind of the rare book and it's the book that I call a great book, when you feel like there isn't a wasted word and that everything is there that has to be there or pretty close to it. So I am starting to be more partial to shorter novels, although there are, of course, the rare exceptions of authors that can write longer novels and some great classics. But there are also some great classics that I simply will probably never read due to the length, no matter how good they are, because that's the world we live in and we only have so much time. So I'll get right into the book itself. So we follow a Papuan villager named Hoiri Sevese. My pronunciation's not going to be great, as usual. Hoiri, we start kind of as he's young and he's getting to puberty. And we get a lot of this in the book. This character's feelings about women, his observing other women, there is a lot of this in the book. And it's actually kind of during a stay with his uncle at the beginning of the book that he really starts to kind of come full swing into this. And then he eventually as he gets a bit older, he gets a woman pregnant. And he's going to a Catholic mission school, so to avoid a scandal, he's kind of forced to marry this woman, and they have their kid, but then it kind of seems like they kind of come to love each other, although this is very much kind of skipped over and you kind of just find it out later. And then Hoiri is sent off to be a carrier on patrols. So from what I understand of this, sort of the Australian colonizing forces are here on military patrols, and this is during World War II, by the way. And Hoiri is kind of serving as somebody who just carries supplies. That's what I got out of it. And while he's doing this, he kind of gets there's a lot going on here about how he's negotiating his traditional culture and his views of the world that come from his traditional culture, and how they sort of mix with the Australian colonial viewpoint here. And early on in the book and late in the book, there's talk of like magicians and sorcerers and sort of the whole sort of paganism, the religion of the native peoples of Papua New Guinea that are all mixed up in his thought process. And this is actually what I like the most about the book, is that I really felt like I was in the head, in the thought process of this person. And there's times, like from a scientific viewpoint, my mind might go, wow, that seems, really ignorant. But then at the same time, pull back a little bit and realize that most people, even living in high-tech, high-science societies, still have a lot of nonsensical beliefs, even if we don't admit it. And it was kind of, a wake-up call for me to start thinking about how, what do we really know about things, and or what do I believe I know about things, and am I really kind of as rational thinking as I like to think I am? And so some of that thought process was going on in my mind, and I was trying not to judge the culture or the main characters, even though some of like the sort of obsessive descriptions of women and their features did get a little bit tiring at times. But yeah, at some point while Hoiri is a carrier, a crocodile eats his wife, leaving his son alone basically, so he has to go and hunt this crocodile, and that's kind of the main action of the book. He goes with his cousin. His cousin is kind of his best friend throughout the book, and goes on the carrier for the patrol duty with him. And then, I don't know if I want to spoil the whole book for you, but I'll just stop there. They're going to go hunt the crocodile. That's kind of like the main story point, where if I say any more, I'd be spoiling the conclusion, right? So, but there is some stuff that happens after that, after the crocodile hunt, that deals with World War II. And the battling between the Australians and the Japanese, that was kind of interesting to see it from the viewpoint of a native from Papua New Guinea. I don't know. It was just a different perspective of World War II that I'd never thought about, as someone who kind of sees it like inconsequential, although some people are actually rooting for the Japanese and saying we're going to be liberated if the Japanese come in. That was kind of interesting. But I think probably from a writing standpoint, what this book does best is landscape and sensory not just landscape descriptions, but sensory descriptions, ways that the wind changes, the ways that the palm trees kind of move in different ways, or the way light reflects off of certain mountains, or there's a lot of very subtle description that mixes the sensory with the psychological, also kind of bringing a psychological viewpoint of animism and sort of where the culture that this character is coming from. I didn't really mark any examples. One thing that Another thing that did kind of make the book difficult for me to read is this used copy I got online has underlining like all throughout the book. Like every single paragraph has at least 2 or 3 lines underlined, and they are apparently at random. Like I can't. There's a lot of stuff in here underlined that I'm just like, why would anyone ever underline this? And then in the beginning, there's like this whole kind of analysis of the book that I can't really make heads or tails of. I mean, I guess, yeah, he's kind of analyzing the book, but then at the end, he writes something about the traditions here. No emotional depth. I don't know if he's referring to the traditions or the book itself, because, I mean, yeah, that would be a fair criticism. There isn't like a whole lot of emotional depth to any of the characters. I don't know if that's what he was intending, but it kind of makes me think, like, even the love that Hoiri supposedly have for his wife seems very like it comes out of nowhere, and that there isn't really a lot of words to describe it. He just kind of stated matter-of-factly. So it's kind of hard for me to tell, like, is this clunky writing or shallow characters, or is it actually reflecting something about the culture that... I remember one particular passage where Hoiri's discussing a funeral, I don't know if it's Hoiri or somebody else is discussing the differences between funerals of the Australians and funerals of the Papua New Guineans, where they, the New Guineans cry at funerals, like they cry, and then the Australians just kind of stand there and don't shed a tear. And that's an interesting perspective, because throughout a lot of the book, I feel like it's somewhat the Papua New Guineans who, for example, are very open about talking about sex or violence or different things, but they don't actually seem to show a lot of emotion in the book, where the Australians actually come off, like the soldiers at the end of the book that Hoiri talks to seem more open and friendly. So it's maybe sometimes in cultures it's not, sometimes we have perspectives of cultures like that they don't show emotion. And I know, like, from my time living in South America, and having that perspective in my life as well, because I'm married to a South American, it's like we Americans don't show, or United Statesians don't show our emotions. We need to show our emotions more, and that's a problem. But also sometimes I feel like we just show our emotions in different ways. And I'm not talking about this case example necessarily, but that different cultures have different ways of showing emotions. Or, for example, I remember talking to a guy from Japan when I was in Peru, and he told us that he'd never once hugged his mother, for example. And it's not that there's no love, I think. It's just that different cultures show their emotions in different ways. So that was a reflection I had while reading this book as well. I don't think there's more to say on that. But, it was an interesting book. Not one of the greatest ever. Certainly, I do appreciate that it was short. It's one, like... This is kind of the difference between this book and the last book I read. If the last book had been under 200 pages, I'm sure I would have finished it. But I stopped at page 100 because I felt like my time was being wasted, and it was 360 pages. This book was difficult and a challenge at the beginning to get into, but I did find interesting things once I got past sort of the initial chapters and the initial hurdles of the book that I discussed. And turned out to be actually, probably not a book that I would necessarily read from cover to cover again, but at least one that I finished and had some reflections on and found interesting. So there's place in life for those two. For me, not every book has to be the greatest book ever written, because, it's... I don't know, the pursuit of always reading the greatest things, I don't know. There's something about that seems futile to me, and like you lose something of yourself in that pursuit. I don't know. That's a reflection for another day, though. So maybe you disagree. That's fine. We can all be different. So take care. We'll see you next time on Mike Reads the World.